So in the previous video, we left off on the step where we have tropomyosin, which has been lifted off the actin, and now that can allow myosin to form cross bridges with the actin. So this actin-myosin interaction then goes into what's called a cross bridge cycle. And I've got the cross bridge cycle all put onto this whiteboard here for you, with the different steps that correspond to the numbers on your question sheet. So with number 29, kind of the first step in the cross bridge cycle is you have the myosin ATP is split into adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate, and that causes the myosin to become energized. So it gives it energy to form cross bridges with the actin. Step 30, you've got myosin binding with actin. One thing to notice in this step is that the ADP and inorganic phosphate are still bound to that myosin head, and that results in a weak binding. So essentially a weak muscle contraction at that stage. And that is step number 30, myosin binding with actin. Step number 25, you can see that the ADP and inorganic phosphate are kicked out of the actin-myosin cross bridge, and that allows the myosin to form a stronger binding to the actin. So it results in a greater force production, a stronger cross bridge formation. The next step you have here is number 27. It's simply the myosin pulling on the actin for that strong muscle contraction. And then for relaxation to occur, you need ATP to come in and bind to the myosin. And then that allows the myosin to dissociate from the actin. So that's kind of one of the first stages in relaxation. And then you can go back to the top of the cross bridge cycle if you want to do another muscle contraction. So that's essentially the cross bridge cycle with all those steps that are labeled on your question sheet. Next what I'm going to do is, that pretty much covers all the steps in contraction. You have a little bit of the steps starting with relaxation here, when ATP binds to the myosin to allow the myosin to dissociate. And I'm going to just go over the other steps in relaxation as outlined on your question sheet. So I'm going to a fresh page here. So the next step here is that ATP is split to adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate by the sarcoplasmic reticulum ATPase. So I'm going to have SR ATPase here, and you get ATP being split to ADP plus inorganic phosphate. And that is step number 28 on your question sheet. That gives you energy to allow you to pump calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So you have calcium that's on the troponin here, that gets pumped back in, and that is step number 32 on your sheet. Okay, so that gets the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Then at the sarcolemma, you've got a sodium-potassium pump that's activated. So again, this involves breakdown of ATP to give you energy. Okay, so that is step number 29 on your question sheet. Sorry, it's not step number 29. It's step number 11 on your question sheet. So that step is ATP is split into ADP and inorganic phosphate at the sarcolemma. That activates the sodium-potassium pump, so that's step number 33 on your sheet. That sodium-potassium pump allows you to restore potassium and sodium to their normal gradients. So what happens is that sodium is pumped out of the muscle fiber. So sodium goes out. And that's step 22. And potassium gets pumped back into the muscle fiber. And that's step 4 on your question sheet. So recall that during muscle contraction, sodium initially came in and potassium left. Now, during recovery, you have the opposite happening. So during recovery, that's what's happening right here, is your sodium potassium pump is being activated and your muscle is returning to its normal state. So that's what happens at the muscle fiber membrane. Then the membrane potential is restored. So that's step number 36 on your question sheet. Then we go up to the axon. Recall that at the initiation of contraction, calcium came into the axon. So now you have calcium leaving the axon during relaxation. And that is step number 19 on your question sheet. And then you have the acetylcholine that has entered this synaptic cleft during contraction. That gets broken down to gets broken down by what's an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase, and that's step number 16 on your sheet. Then part of that, the acetate that's formed from that gets taken away in the blood, and the remaining part is called choline that gets taken back up into the axon, and that whole thing is step number 23 on your question sheet. So there you go. That is muscle contraction and relaxation kind of in a nutshell, all the important steps.